Hi everyone. So this is the review video for the article "Naked and Afraid" by Martha Nussbaum. So remember, when we talked about this, it feels like a long, long time ago. This is the article that spends a lot of time talking about how infants are unique. Human beings are unique when they're infants in the animal world because we have the cognitive ability to realize we are helpless. Infants, of course, don't have language and such, but they know that they can't do stuff. So as she says in the article, when we see an infant trying to, move and take control, and we laugh because it looks cute, and so that infant is terrified. And she makes the real point here that our first emotion when we're born and we come into the world is fear. We feel a sense of unbelievable helplessness. And she puts it, really, I think the writing is really terrific here. And because she begins by making it seem like imagine a situation, and she describes it, and what she's describing is what all of us have gone through and don't remember. And she has that important uh, way of expressing it in paragraph 7. We do not survive it without being formed, because all of us are formed in our childhoods and then our early childhoods, and deformed, meaning that sometimes it has a huge impact on us, our early childhoods, that have lasting negative effects on us. And again, she makes a point throughout that fear is the natural state that humans are in when they're born. And she talks about throughout the article that this is a political thing, because if we don't, as individuals and then as society, get past our fear, it can be very debilitating, and it can cause society to go in bad directions. And as I pointed out when we were in class, ultimately this is an article about what has happened in our society with, in paragraph 17 towards the end, when she talks about having fear, or maybe it's a little bit paragraph 15 or so, that this fear simmers in us, and then we start to fear other people. We have these fears as adults that become irrational and lead us to making bad decisions, ultimately Trump getting into the White House. So other things to say about this is she makes, it's pretty interesting. The article talks about how the infant, in order to survive, enslaves the parent. If the parent, the caretaker, becomes the servant of the infant, in order for the infant's needs to be met, the infant is all needy and gives nothing other than being cute and the love that the parent feels. It gives nothing back. And Rousseau, the philosopher, points this out, and he says, he was very astute at being able to understand that this is what children do to the parents, and even though he himself was a terrible father, and he let his kids go and whatnot. So that brought up the interesting conversation. If someone is very thoughtful or very creative or artistic, and yet at the same time and offers these wisdom and beauty and such in poetry or music and so forth, but it then lives a life that we find appalling, what do we do with that? So that's one of the topics that people can write about, and that's just an interesting thing to think about. And we see a lot of this in Hollywood and with writers and performers, where they make music and to do performances that we are really impressed with and really touch us, and really shows that they have a deep understanding of the human condition. And then they're jerks, bastards in how they treat people, and what do you do with that? But his point is here that the author talks about that that children enslave. So then what happens as the child grows? Does the child, as the child becomes an adult, is he or she able to get over that? And there's a lot of the article that talks about being able to develop mutual interdependence, which is the ability to be interconnected as adults with each other, but not have a need to enslave, to conquer. And I always find this interesting when you have these managers in companies and restaurants, stuff, where where the need to control the employee, the person under you, is somehow greater than the job. This is me making a concept, and you think, is this really necessary, or is this somehow the person's inner need just to have control? And I talked about this in class, that I, as the teacher, am very conscious of this. Like, I don't want to be the controller of the students. Obviously, I'm trying in the best interest, by assigning work that people need to do and they need to be successful in order to pass. But I don't want to be the person who says, you must do this. I'm in charge. I control you, because I want to be in a mutually interdependent relationships with everybody I know. And sometimes I'm the leader, but I don't want to be the controller. And I really don't like it when when the class gets, when I need to act like a disciplinarian, because that's something I don't want to do. But then there are other people who really thrive on exerting their control over others when it's not necessary. So this article would argue in a concept that maybe those people have never gotten over that need to be controlling from their fears when they were children and such. So the article, talks about all these different concepts, and says what we need to have an interconnected society is to be able to is to get past this and be able to have goodwill and with each other. So I know people are very keen on the questions, so I'm going to try to go over some of these. I talked about number one. We usually survive the condition of infancy, but we're formed and sometimes deformed by it, because we really get defined there. I just talked about mutual interdependence. This is that as adults, we're able to lean on each other. We're able to serve each other and be served by each other. And we see this theme, I think, throughout many of the articles that I picked this semester. Explain the connection the author is making between the fear of infants and how people in society today. In paragraph 15, right now, fear is running rampant in our nation. Fear of declining standards of living, of unemployment, and of the absence of health care in our times. So this is what it's talking about. Our narrative, paragraph 16, our narrative of fear tells us that bad things can happen. Citizens may become indifferent to the truth and prefer the comfort of an insular group of peers who repeat one another's falsehoods. So it goes on to say that when you feel fear, you live in a bubble, and then when people start talking like, well, you want to blame someone else. So this article is really trying to make the point again that we are prone as human beings to fear as our first reaction, and if we can't get over it, then we're prone to making these weak and false decisions, to blaming people, and then someone like Trump can come along and use that to his advantage. So then there's a question that people will come to us is, what is the good fear talked about in paragraph 17? So usually, in her article, she's making the point that fear is a bad thing, but sometimes being mindful of fear is a good thing. So fear of terrorism, fear of unsafe highways and bridges, fear of loss of freedom. And so it's a good thing to be conscientious that bad things could happen, and that you have a fear of things going wrong. This is the answer to question 4, that you're able to anticipate bad things and do something about it. So of course, the big thing at the moment hanging over all of us is the pandemic, and it would have been a good thing if the leaders had an appropriate fear that this could have happened, and they should have, because there has been lots of writing in the scientific community in virology, the study of viruses, that this was a possibility, and our government has contingency plans for almost every scenario, including this. So they should have been prepared. They should have had the appropriate fear and been able to react quicker and more efficiently so that this wouldn't have happened. So of course I'm making an editorial here, but I'm also explaining the answer to question 4 and what is trying to be said in paragraph 17, that when you have a fear that something can go wrong, like a bridge collapsing, you do something about it. And that's a good fear, because it keeps you on your toes to take care of things that need to be taken care of, and that you anticipate problems and you solve them so that the problems don't become a pandemic and such. And of course we screwed up collectively, the government screwed up royally in this situation. But that's what that's talking about in question 4. So I think that's covering most of this in an broad overview as possible. So after watching the video, if you have specific questions as you're reading, of course, put the questions in the replies, and I will try to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you very much.